Welcome to the Inside Out Money Podcast.
Can't even recognize this place. Too many pieces of our past mistakes.
Hi, I'm Maggie, and I believe real change starts from the inside out. So let's work together to improve our money and our lives from the inside out. We will explore all things money and our relationship with it. Join me each week with a rotating set of co-hosts, friends, and interviews. Let's jump in.
This time, we going round and round and round and round and round.
Okay, hi, and welcome to the Inside Out Money Podcast. Today's podcast is going to be a little bit different in the sense that it is just me here today. So if you've listened to this podcast before, I am usually here with one of a rotating set of co-hosts that are a bunch of different friends of mine and also my husband. And we always cover a different financial topic, something to help you improve your financial mindset and tactics. Today's episode, you've just got me. There is no co-host. I'm all alone here, and I'm going to be answering listener Q&A. And this is a little bit of a trial episode in the sense of we'll see how it is to do a solo episode from my perspective and then also what you guys think of it. I'm probably not going to do these that often, but every now and then there's a topic like a bunch of listener Q&A where it doesn't necessarily make sense to bring a specific co-host on, and just quite honestly, sometimes we have some scheduling conflicts and the timing just doesn't work out quite right. And so that's a little bit of what inspired today's solo episode. So we'll see how it goes. Okay, so I recently put a post on Instagram asking for different topics requests and different listener questions. Got a ton of different questions. I'm going to cover as many of them as I can in one episode. And these are roughly grouped here and there in different sections. And we will just jump in, but we're going to cover a lot of different topics and we'll see how this goes. Okay, so the first question is a little bit of a lengthier one. This one actually came in via email. For the sake of time, I'm going to skip. I'm just going to paraphrase the email. Okay, hi Maggie. I just started listening to your podcast a few weeks ago and I felt compelled to write you. Well, thank you very much. First, really enjoying the show. So much thought-provoking content, and you and Liz are especially funny. Second, I'm a fellow Georgian. Blah, 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 blah. I'm going to leave a bunch of this out because it's some kind of personal stuff. Okay, then they say, I started late on my FI journey, racking up debt in my 20s, getting out of said debt in my 30s, and now in my early 40s, finally making good money and able to sock away more than I ever dreamed possible. That is awesome. So they then go on to say, what I wanted to get to that I'd love to hear your thoughts on was about where I am starting on my FI journey. My savings and investments are automated. I'm working towards continually growing my salary, and it just feels boring and slow. I compulsively check my accounts and run and rerun my numbers, but now I just wait? How did you keep yourself engaged in the process in a useful way when you were still years away from the retirement part? Thanks so much for your show. Have a great weekend. This person's name is MJ, which I love too because if you guys know me, my first and middle initials are also MJ, and I went through a phase where I was trying to get MJ to be like my nickname, but it never caught on. Okay, so that's a great question. And then someone else actually on Instagram submitted a similar question. How do you sit in the boring part of just letting the money grow? And then I actually had a third person ask me something similar via a DM the other day. So a few thoughts on this. First off, for me, when my money was growing, I was really busy working and I had younger kids. So I was kind of distracted, quite honestly. And it was easy to not get bored because I was just busy doing other things. But, taking that out of the equation, I would say, a big tactic I would think about is just focus on the stuff you can control, right? You can't control that you kind of consider it boring or whatever. You can try to reframe it. I would say instead of the kind of boring middle, this is the magical part where you don't actively have to do as much. You just have to spend less than you make and watch it grow. So in this person's specific example, they were actually talking about how now they're in their 40s and finally making good money and able to sock away more than they ever dreamed possible. Well, I don't think that's boring. I think that's pretty exciting. And then you're in the magical part where you actually watch and you don't have to watch it all the time, right? But when you check in on things, you see the power of compound interest, especially when the market's up like it has been in the last few years. And so the other thing I would say is don't just sit and wait, right? Don't, the way this was described at times, and someone's literally said, is how do you just sit in the boring middle? You don't just sit in it, would be my advice, right? Go enjoy your life. I've always loved the pioneers. They coined this term in the FI space, but it's a broader term of focus on the journey, not just the destination. I think sometimes we get so focused on, particularly in the FIRE community where we're trying to get to, we don't always appreciate the journey and enjoy our lives on the way there. So I'd highly recommend going and checking out some of the pioneers content. I'll put a link in the show notes. They've got a blog and a bunch of YouTube videos and other things. And it just is it's another reframing of like, don't think of it as just sitting and waiting. Enjoy your life, right? And you also can enjoy and appreciate what being on your way to FIRE or even just FI feels like, right? You might not be ready to actually do the retire early, or you may never want to, but you have, when you get even halfway to FI or even a quarter of the way to what you would consider financial independence, that means you have a healthy enough amount of money socked away and banked that you have what people call FU money. You've got enough money that you could leave a toxic or negative job if you wanted to. You could start to work part-time. You could shift careers into something that was more purposeful for you and fulfilling for you. You could decide you wanted to stay at home with your kids for a while if you wanted to. To me, enjoy your life and appreciate, even on that journey, what the idea of FI brings to you. I remember when I was working a fairly demanding and stressful job in corporate America, I would often kind of obsessively check my accounts at times. And it would always give me a really good sense of confidence to like be true to who I am at work. Don't compromise, not just my values, because I don't think I was rarely pushed to compromise my values in any way at work, but don't compromise who I am and my personality and the unique traits that make me me. And so I was pretty silly at work and funny, and I tried to not take things too seriously most of the time. And that had different effects on different people, but it's who I am. And I really tried to show up very authentically at work. And the closer to FI I got, the more confident and comfortable I felt showing up authentically to work. So again, you don't need to think of it as the boring middle. Think of it as all of these things where, you're magically making money in the background while you can every day become more authentically you. And you don't just have to wait, right? You can amp it up. You like I said, you can kind of live your life. You can amp it up. You can get more aggressive at times on how much less you're spending than what you make and how you're investing and all of that. You can go through different phases where you're getting more aggressive on savings, and that kind of gives you something to focus on and keep you entertained on. Or you can focus on living your life, right? And you can oscillate between those two things. But my biggest advice to you as someone who has been there and done that in the sense of early retiring, over 2 years ago. And I can tell you from experience, once you hit that goal of early retirement, if that's where you're headed, you are not going to just magically be happy. You're going to have so many feelings. The ways you present in the world at work are going to still present in your personal life, in your early retirement life. And so I would just really challenge you to not think of it as the boring middle, but actually think of it as just part of your life, right? So just think of it as a phase of the journey of life and appreciate that this is an important phase, right? It's the wealth building phase that will allow you freedom, complete freedom at a different point in your life, but that still gives you a lot of freedom while you're building things in many different ways. Again, to me, so much of this is mindset based. If you reframe your thinking from thinking about it as the boring middle. And then my final piece on this would be just read a lot of books and consume podcasts and different content of other people. Go to FI conferences, which I'll talk more about, and surround yourself with other people that are also, quote, in that boring middle, because I think that can also be very empowering and just make you not feel alone on that journey. When you have a sense of community, I think it feels very different. Okay, next question. How did you know when you had enough to retire, and how did you know you were ready? Okay, it's kind of a two-part question, but great question. So a couple things. I'm going to reference a bunch of episodes and put them in the show notes. And by the way, anyone that wants to get to our show notes, you can get to them at our website at insideoutmoney.org, or you can go to the show notes in the podcast app you're listening to, and there'll be a link to the show notes page on the website. So I'm going to answer this a little bit more high level, and I'm going to reference 3 episodes where we talk about this in different ways. So there's 2 old Friends on Fire episodes. One is number 138. It's called How a Family of 5 Can Afford to Retire at 41 and 43. Talks a little bit about how we funded our early retirement and kind of planned for it. Another episode is podcast is Friends on Fire episode number 190, The Financial Mechanics of Early Retirement. And then there's an Inside Out Money episode that Andrew and I did that is episode number 22, which is How Much Do You Need to Retire and Flaws in the 4% Rule. I would recommend going back and listening to all of those for more detailed answers on this. Okay, there's two parts to the question. One is, how'd you know how much you needed to retire? So financially, to know that at a very, very high level, again, go listen to those episodes, but at a high level, you need to know your annual expenses. So you need to track your expenses enough that you feel confident in what it costs you and or you and your family to live for a year, and not just 1 year, but like a year on average, right? And things can change year to year. So you need to have a really good sense that you've got like a consistent number of what it costs you to live for a year. And then you apply the theory of what's known as the 4% rule. Stated a different way, it's the idea that you need 25 times your annual expenses to retire. So if it costs you $100,000 a year to live, for easy math, you need $2.5 million in the bank, or I would argue, invested, not just sitting in the bank. But that's the rough math that should hold up at any age. And there's a lot of research and other things behind that. And there's a lot of nuances to it, but that's the rough guidance. And then you can pad that number if you want to, right? So you can say, well, I don't feel good about that number because 4% is risky. And, what if? You could what if forever. So pad that number if you want, right? Figure out what number makes you feel comfortable and then set that as your goal. There's a lot of really great free tools that are out there that can help you with some of this modeling. Two that I really like are the CFire Sim tool. And then there's a withdrawal rate toolbox on the Early Retirement Now website. Those are both free tools, and there's a lot of content and support around them, and I'll put links in the show notes to them. But if you want to go do some more detailed modeling of your specific situation, those can be helpful tools. And then I'd say the other part of the question is, they said, how'd you know when you were ready? Well, financially, I talk about how I knew I was ready in some of those episodes I referenced, but I used the 4% rule, the 25 times. And then also I padded it because I had things that I was afraid of. And so for me, I was never going to feel fully mentally ready because it was too big of a shift from everything I had ever known or thought to be normal or expected of me in this world. There were a lot of things that were holding me back, a lot of things that I was afraid of. I actually did an entire podcast episode on all the things that I was afraid of, and I will put a link in the show notes to that episode. But a lot of fear was holding me back. Eventually, I got to the point where I became more afraid of not doing it versus doing it. And doing it was pulling the trigger and actually resigning from my corporate America job and doing the, RE part of FIRE, which is financial independence, retire early. A lot of people get to the FI, they don't always do the RE part. So I finally felt like I had gotten to the FI part, and then it still took me a little while longer to actually pull the trigger, as you will. And so again, for me, I just got to the point where I was more afraid of not doing it versus doing it. I was realizing that my kids were getting older. I had the money in theory, and I could always go back to work if I had to. And if I hated the decision on the flip side, I could always go back. But I couldn't, I just pictured myself looking down the line 10, 20, 30 years down the line and not having done this and thinking what was I doing? I didn't need more money. What was I going to do with more money? But I did need more time, and time with my kids and myself and my husband and my family were fleeting and are fleeting. And so I'm 2 years in, feeling very good about the decision I made, no regrets. Haven't looked back on all the things I was afraid of, have not come to fruition, and I feel really good about it. Okay, one more early retirement question. Actually, there's two more. One is favorite early retirement hobbies. I'll hit this one quick because I don't know. I almost have I was going to say I have a lot to say and then so little to say, but I'd say this podcast is one of them for sure, right? This podcast for me, it is totally a hobby and a passion project. I purposely don't do ads. I don't want to make any meaningful amount of money off of it. I don't mind covering my costs a little bit, but I don't want to make any money. And covering my costs, I sell some stickers and templates on Etsy for $3. That's the kind of thing that I say when I mean cover my costs. But for me, this podcast really replaces a lot of the accomplishment and service needs that I got from work that did feel good and that was an aspect of work that I enjoyed and got a lot out of. And so I really, when I get a message from somebody that this podcast has helped them in some way or changed the way they think about money or changed the way, inspired them to do something different for their own family. Like that is incredibly meaningful to me. And I'll just leave it at that. It means a lot. By the way, if you want to go leave a review for the Inside Out Money podcast, it's really helpful to leave a written review on Apple Podcasts. I read all of them and they make me feel really good and they make the other co-hosts feel really good. And so again, this is a hobby. This is a passion project. And I started it before early retirement, but I have a lot more time to actually put into it now. Okay. I've also been playing a lot of pickleball. I have like a group of friends that are available / just kind of can get away from work for an hour or two and work remote that I play pickleball with during the day a couple times a week usually. I really enjoy that. That's something I did not do back when I was working. I've been getting into like strength training just because I'm, getting older and learning how important that is. And, I spend a decent amount of time like being fit and active and working out and stuff like that. And then the other thing that my hobbies are like, I just love I don't know if freedom is a hobby, but I love just that I can kind of like, I have a lot of hobbies I want to do and things I want to get into and I like building stuff. I like fixing things. I built a really cool mailbox. I like painting stuff. I like certain kind of craft projects. And I just like that I can like do whatever I want on any given week. And, I bought a guitar recently and I kind of want to learn how to play the guitar. And I have my dad's old guitars and I haven't had time to get into that yet, but I will eventually. And if I don't like it, I'm just going to move on to something else. And so there's a lot of things I want to try and see if I like, and I'll, adjust as I get some learnings. But ultimately I would say I have more hobbies than I have time, because I am involved in a lot of volunteer activities and on a number of volunteer boards in my community. And that takes up a lot of my time. And I do enjoy it, but I actually want a little bit more time for some personal hobbies and to shift a little bit less away from that. Okay, so that's hobbies. Next question. How do you make friends before, during, early retirement? Okay, this is a good question. I would say it's not that different from how you make friends in general, which there's a lot of like content out there lately about how hard it is for adults to make friends versus like when you're, a kid or a teenager in college or something. So it can be hard to make and maintain friendships. You got to put effort into it, but you ultimately have to find people that you're interested in being friends with. And we can talk about, where you do that. I wouldn't say it's that different than how you make friends not during early retirement, other than you now have more time to put into your friendships, which is great. I think you might need to be location agnostic about where some of your friends are, which is important, particularly if you're looking for like fire friends. They may not always live in your community, but, look for fire groups and things in your area. I'm going to combine this answer with another question I got, which said best 5 meetup groups and conferences. So I've met some people that I really like and am friends with and want to continue to be friends with and to grow friendships with at Camp Fi. So I'm a big fan of Camp Fi. It was created and is still hosted by this guy named Steven. He's awesome. He's created them like all over the US. I think they're actually taking the first one international this year. And there's definitely, if you live in the US, there's one like near you. There's a Midwest one. There's a North. I don't know. There's one for like every region of the US. They're small and intimate. They're not super expensive. It's literally like being at summer camp with a bunch of adults. There's a lot of free time to get to know people. There's a small amount of content and then a lot of like activities and kind of unstructured, unscheduled time. I love it. I've met a lot of people I really like and care for and want to continue to invest in friendships with at Camp Fi. I'm not a big fan of FinCon. It's a conference for creators and hustlers. No disrespect to FinCon, but I've been twice. And it sort of took me twice to realize I like seeing certain people at it, but I leave feeling bad about myself and confused about what I want to do with my early retirement life. And it's just got a vibe that is very much like selling you on a dream of making tons of money, creating content. And the reality is that's not realistic for most people. And so it also has a vibe of like, you'll meet people there that have spent a lot of money to get there, thousands of dollars. And they, have an idea and they believe they're going to, make some big thing out of it. And some people will, but not, the majority of people won't, just based on the odds of success. And so, I'm just not a big fan of FinCon. I'm a big fan of Economy, even though I haven't been there. I've heard of, I really like the founder, Diana Miriam. I've had the opportunity to hang out with her a number of times and I just really love her. She actually was once on a Friends on Fire episode. I'll put a link in the show notes to that. But I haven't been able to go because it's always during volleyball season, and there's always like a big volleyball tournament on the weekend that it is in the fall. And just because of the phase and priorities in my life at this time, I want to be there for my kids' volleyball tournament. But someday I will go to an economy, and I'm excited for it. And I know so many people who rave about it and have met and get to see a lot of their friends there. Also, there's local Choose FI meetup groups. So like look on Facebook. There's a bunch of different FI groups of different types on Facebook. And again, it's not going to happen overnight, but you can meet people through it and make friends, back to the original question, before and during early retirement. And I would definitely encourage you to do it before. Greg and I went to a Camp FI before we early retired. It was incredibly helpful. And then we went to one after we early retired, also incredibly helpful in a different way. And the types of conversations and the types of people we were talking to were different in those different phases of our life, but they were just invaluable and something that we've really gotten a lot out of. So my final thing on just the friendship thing is you got to put into it what you want to get out of it, right? So it takes getting a little bit out of your comfort zone, being vulnerable, reaching out to somebody. I remember at Camp FI saying to a couple that we met, like, I really like you guys. I really want to be friends with you. And I remember Liz Gets Loaded from this podcast, said something similar to me when she came on Friends on Fire and when we had kind of met through Instagram. And that means something, so you might say that to someone and it doesn't always get reciprocated, but that's okay. But say it. Like if you really enjoy someone, vocalize it, be vulnerable, just like in a romantic relationship, be willing to put yourself out there and say how you feel and say that you really appreciated getting to know someone and the conversations you've had with them and you would love to keep in touch and, whatever it might be. And so I think that would be my biggest advice on just how to make friends. And then also turn to content. There's some good books and podcasts and other things on that topic. None that I can specifically recommend, but I know they're out there. Okay, next question is specifically asking about the Bogleheads investing strategy of a mix of US and international versus the J.L. Collins / Warren Buffett investing strategy of all in on US stocks only. Okay, this is one where it'd be fascinating to get Andrew's answer versus mine, but I'll tell you my answer. It doesn't matter. Let me clarify that. But you'll hear me say this a lot on the podcast. I think often, and I'm speaking to the average person out there, right? I'm not speaking to somebody who wants to go deep on an analysis and comparison of which one of these investing strategies is going to be better over a 50-year time horizon. None of us know the answer, right? We're all guessing on historical performance and a bunch of other data points and other things. My comment on it doesn't matter is if you are doing either one of those two strategies, you're already doing 80 to 90% of what really matters. And so feel good about what really matters is that you spend less than you make and that you invest the difference, right? So if you favor one of them and you feel really good about it and you have a whole strategy and rationale for why, good for you. That is awesome. If you are overwhelmed by that very question, don't stress on it. Just pick one and stick with it. So I, for example, pretty much am in all US stocks. So I'm more on the J.L. Collins, Warren Buffett angle from that point of view on an investment strategy. But it's not because I know for a fact that's going to do better. It happens that it has done better. So for the last 13 plus years, the US stock market has outperformed international stock performance. But that may not continue in the future, right? There's an argument that a lot of US stocks or US tech stocks in particular are overvalued right now. So I don't know, and I don't really care, quite honestly. For me, and again, I believe this to be true for the average person, it doesn't matter. You don't need to overthink it. You need to kind of get, it's the 80-20 rule, right? Get 80% of the stuff right and don't sweat the other 20%. And know that if you're just doing 80% of it right, which is spending less than you make, investing the difference. You just can't predict whether all in on the US stock, whether all in on US stocks or a mix of US and international is a better investing strategy. I couldn't tell you, right? And again, my point of view on it is it doesn't matter. Pick one that you feel more comfortable with and stick with that. And don't constantly second guess it. Just let it ride. This is a long-term investment strategy on either one of those two approaches. Okay, next question. How did you find your CFP, which stands for Certified Financial Planner, and any recommendations? Well, first off, this question might have come from someone, they might have meant something a little bit different, but I was going to joke this might have come from someone that doesn't know me that well, because on the Friends on Fire podcast and on the Inside Out Money podcast, there's been entire episodes dedicated to why you don't need a financial planner and how to break up with your financial planner. So episode 90 on Friends on Fire was called Why You Don't Need a Financial Planner. Episode 58 on an Inside Out Money podcast was called Breaking Up with Your Financial Planner, Why and How to Do It. And to be clear, I'm mostly talking about a commission-based percentage of assets under management-based financial planner. I don't think they're helpful. I have used one for short periods of time in the past, and I spent 10 plus years looking for one, thinking that that was the answer to all my problems. And back to what I was just saying about the investment allocation strategy of, all US stocks or a mix of international or whatever. I felt like I needed someone like that to tell me what I needed to do. Go listen to those episodes so you hear why you don't. But I don't use a certified financial planner, and I haven't for the past, I don't know how many years, most of my life. If I was going to use someone though, I would use someone that is fee-based and charges hourly. And actually, Personal Finance Club just launched a product in the past year called Nectarine. Liz Gets Loaded, who's one of the co-hosts on this podcast, her podcast this past week was doing a review of the Nectarine platform. And she, just out of curiosity, booked an hour. It allows you to just book an hour with somebody, and you can kind of read profiles before you commit and work with a financial planner on an hourly basis. And I'm supportive of that, and I think it can be helpful, and I'd recommend going and listening to Liz's episode on that. It's a quick 20-minute episode. There's also a website called NAPFA, which is NAPFA. It's the National Association of Personal Financial Advisors, and their business model is a strict fee-only fiduciary capacity. And so financial planners that work with them have to only work with fees and not do a commission assets under management model, which is what I'm not a big fan of and don't think anybody needs. And again, go listen to the podcast for why. So that's a great website if you want to look somebody up. I would also tap into the FI community for personal recommendations. So if I was looking for somebody, which I might be at some point in my life, I might want to go get some focused advice specifically on, withdrawal strategy or tax optimization or things like that. I would reach out to a lot of people I know in the FI community, and I would ask for recommendations. And then the next thing I would do was kind of go look around on Nectarine, and then I might go look around at some profiles on the NAPFA website. I'm just a big fan of people who charge hourly if I was going to work with anyone. Okay, next question. Bringing up finances with somebody not good at finances. That is an incredibly common problem. I hear it from people all the time. So much so that we did an episode on Friends on Fire that was episode number 109, which was talking to your partner about money. By the way, Friends on Fire was my old podcast that I did for 3 years with a friend of mine named Mike. And then Mike didn't want to do it anymore. And so I relaunched Inside Out Money in 2023. But that Friends on Fire episode, all we talk about is how to talk to people that not only aren't good at money, but don't want to talk about money. And so I'd go listen to that, but my high level advice would be, you can't come in hot telling them then that they're not good about money. That's not helpful, right? So you got to start with the why and what your life goals are. I'm assuming this is someone's partner. So start with your life goals and why being good about money matters. Be vulnerable, admit some of your own mistakes. I think often kind of focusing in getting your own house in order is important also. And I just, my biggest advice is start those conversations gently and from a place of love and respect and vulnerability, and not from a place of, I'm right, you're wrong, I'm good at money, you're not, I'm doing all the good stuff, you're doing all the bad stuff, and you need to get better and be more like me. That won't help anybody. And 99% of the time, that will not be successful. So I'd say that's my biggest advice. And then I'd say go listen to that episode for some more detailed, nuanced advice. Okay. This is the last topic and question I'm going to talk about, because there were more questions than I could cover in one episode. But again, if this is a format people like, I'll do another episode like this sometime in the next few weeks or a couple months. Okay, I got a lot of questions about kids and money. I'm going to do an entire episode on this soon, but I wanted to just kind of tease it with some high-level thoughts. So here's one more detailed question I got. Hi, Maggie. It's Erica's friend, Judith. Well, hi, Judith. Catching up with episodes this morning, and you all deserve a icon, gold medal. Such good info. Shout out to Liz in the Great Savings Rate episode. Maybe I missed this, but if you haven't, would you do an episode about teens and young adults someday? I'm in the rabbit hole of cards/apps that best support financial responsibility for our sons. I'd love to hear advice from the Inside Out Money because you all and the co-hosts have really valuable insight and knowledge. And then she said, hope the rest of your summer is glorious. I just really appreciated the word glorious because I feel like it's underused and was just very nice. So thanks, Judith. My summer was glorious. And then a bunch of other people said, how do you talk to kiddos about money, navigating the spend on and for teens? So again, there's a lot to talk about with kids and money. And I've done a number of episodes with Friends on Fire specifically dedicated to kids, but I want to do one on the Inside Out Money podcast that's a little bit more fresh because I think my perspective and some things have changed as my kids have gotten older. But here are my high level thoughts on kids. And specifically, like Judith mentioned, like cards and apps. I don't even think you need to go there yet with kids. That's not where I would start. And like she said, it can be a rabbit hole. There's so many different things. There's like the Greenlight credit card. There's a bunch of different apps. I remember trying some things. Many of them were like very complicated. I remember we had like a Chore Monster app. I don't know. Lots of different things we tried over the years. What I have found to be the most successful is first, openly talking to your kids about money. So discussing the price of things. And I'll give you an example. Like when my kids were young and still to this day, when they are in the grocery store or any store and they bring me a product that they want, I say, how much is that? And they're often like, oh, I don't know. Now they know and they like tell me the price. And then we'll go back to like the cookie aisle and I'm like, we're at Aldi and I'm like, hey, look, there's these cookies that are like $3.99 and then there's these cookies that are like $1.09. What would you rather? And when we like talk about it, right? And sometimes there is a reason you want to pay more for something, but often they're like, oh no, I'm good with those. Can I have those? The $1 ones? And so I just think one of the best ways to teach your kid about money is to openly talk about it. It shouldn't be a taboo topic. They should understand how much things cost. You should talk about how much car insurance costs as your kids are starting to drive, how much a deductible is if you get in a wreck, what it would cost if you got in an at-fault accident, the cost of therapy, the cost of vacations, again, little things like the cost of food. You know, I think one of the best ways for them to learn is for them to understand the cost and value of things. And then the second thing is, I really believe kids need to have some like skin in the game and understand the concept of earning money and spending money. And if they're always handed all their money, when they ask for something, it just gets bought for them. I don't think they in any way learn how to make decisions and trade-offs and how to value things and how to like spend money intentionally. And so our kids at different times on and off have gotten allowances when they do some very basic things. Sometimes they don't feel like doing those things and they don't earn allowances, but they do get different opportunities to earn money. So there'll be days where I'm just like, I need a bunch of things done around the house. And I'm like, who wants to earn $5 to clean a bathroom? It does not take very long to clean a bathroom, by the way, especially the way they clean it. And so $5 is like a good rate that they're getting for that. But I'll say, I need this done. Does anybody want to earn some money? And so they have opportunities to earn money, and then they're expected to use their own money when they want to go out and do something with their own friends. So if we're going out to eat as a family, like, of course, dinner's on us. But if you want to go out with your friends, by yourself with your friends, and you guys choose to go eat out when like our own family is not even going to eat out, that's an opportunity for you to use your own money. And our kids know that and they've grown up that way and they're very fine with it. You know, there might have been like a tiny bit of pushback, but again, we talk really openly and we're like, hey, look, we're not even going out to eat as a family and you're welcome to go do that. And you'll have lots of opportunities to earn money, but you do have to use your own money. And I will say all of our kids, I think, have a pretty good sense at their age of what things in life generally cost and how you earn money and how you spend money and how long it takes to earn certain amounts of money versus how much something costs. And they each have their own savings account. They each have college funds. They know that we encourage grandparents to put money for birthdays and holidays and Christmas and all that stuff into one of those accounts versus buying them something that they don't necessarily need. When the kids were younger, we didn't even ask. Now I ask. So one of my kids just turned 13 and I said to her, is there anything you want? Because I'm happy to buy you something. Or I'll put about twice the amount of money into your savings account or your college fund. And usually I'll offer to put more. I'll say like, look, I'll give you $100 for your birthday, or I'll put $200 into your college fund. Which would you rather have? And most of the time they'll choose the college fund lately because they're getting gifts from other people, and they generally, I think, realize they have enough. And sometimes we'll split the amount. Sometimes we'll say, okay, well, I do want this one thing and it's $25, and then, will you put the rest in here? And so I just, my biggest piece of advice with kids is like, there's not a special card, there's not a special app that's going to magically make everything great and make your kids responsible about money. I think holding them accountable and letting them have some skin in the game with how they earn and spend money is important. And I think talking very openly about money is important. So those would probably be my two biggest things. And again, I'll do a whole detailed episode on this, but those are the biggest things for me on kids of all ages. Okay, like I said, we got a bunch of other questions. I am going to cover them in a future listener Q&A episode because I just don't have time to cover them all here. But I really appreciate all of you who took the time to send in a question, and I hope this was a helpful episode. And if it wasn't, shoot me a text or a voicemail at 404-981-3370, or you can always send me a message on Instagram. I genuinely like to hear what's helpful and what's not in terms of episode format and stuff like that. Because again, I want this to be, as much as I said this is a passion project earlier, I also want it to be something that's helpful, or I wouldn't put my time and energy against it. So I appreciate hearing people's feedback. And again, if you've enjoyed today's episode, I always appreciate it if you want to give a written review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. I really appreciate it. And I always encourage people to share an episode with friends or family members just to encourage ongoing discussions about money. Thank you so much. Bye.
We going round and round and round and round and round.